welcome to the Brothers of the Sword Productions, Island Prophesy, Part 3, Sword Brother's Identity, that will be translated from the Legacy Message, retrieved from the now missing inscribed stone, that was purportedly found in the money pit. For the complete details of any previous translations, please refer to Part 1 and 2. Translations are only reviewed to expand on its meaning or to describe it from a different perspective. To get a feel for how the Sword Brother's name is translated, we're going to take a second look at the first symbol group on the stone that translated into the words ord, word, and sword, which are connected to the symbol group directly beneath it. The first clue indicating they are connected is the arrow pointing down. Ord in Middle English means beginning, point, point of origin, point of a weapon, or place, but here we'll interpret it as origin regarding the name of the Sword Brother. And as we found out, a brother whom holds various religious beliefs and carries a sword. In Part 1 and 2, the importance of the two slashes over the second V was interpreted as 1 and 2, duality, mirror images for reflection and symmetry, as well as multiple meanings in the message. Before we translate the Sword Brother's name from the code, let's get a feel for how important mirror images are in this translation, and as well abbreviations. In antiquity, they say mirror images reminded you not to think of yourself as God. I believe mirror images and symmetry are pointing out intrinsic patterns of nature that follow universal laws that link life, mathematics, and philosophy, bringing the beauty of goodness, truth, and justice forward. I'm introducing this mirror image now because it will be very pertinent in the next part. Keep in mind that the inscribed stone's numbers can help find a location of interest for a possible treasure that are translated from the associated numbers from the Greek alphabet, as pointed out in Part 1 and 2. But there are other more helpful clues that use different translation methods that make this location much more clear. The stone just reinforces this location and functions more to answer why they came to Oak Island. First, we're going to look at the two V's with the lines over them from a couple different perspectives, and then we'll translate his name. The Sword Brother wants you to make a mirror image underneath the two V's. What you first see is two X's, but he designed this as an illusion. What he wants you to really see is two triangles inverted inside each other. In the next part, we'll build further on this idea and interpret his intentions in more detail. The first clue he gives for you to build these opposing triangles are the inverted V's found on each side of the four dots in the second symbol group on line 1. Not only did the four dots outline a square, but also it outlines two pillars on each side to make an N. And as well, in the first symbol group, we added a mirror image line to make the S for the word sword. Now, if we put these four pillars together, we have a square. The Sword Brother really did want you to draw something inside a square, as mentioned in Part 2. Or, well, it's not quite a square yet, but it will eventually be in the next part. Secondly, the purpose for overlines and even underlines on Roman numerals is to indicate that it's a number instead of a letter. However, the lines associated to these two V's have a couple different functions. Ancients, up to medieval scribes, used scribal abbreviations when copying manuscripts in Latin, and later in Greek and Old Norse. The formal word for this in plural is sigla, and singular siglum. Scribes liberally used abbreviations and symbols signifying abbreviations in order to fit as much information into the smallest space. Modern governments weren't the inventor of an insane amount of acronyms and abbreviations to do business. In the Stone's translation, the first abbreviation that we stumbled across was the Latin acronym for king, RI, Rex Imperator, or queen, Regina Imperatrix. The second abbreviation that we translated so far from the inscribed stone is the letters BTR for the word brother that brought together the message Brothers of the Sword. The BTR is part of the Middle English word betray that is missing the I, So we could construct the abbreviation, and as well we will see in the next part, to construct a number for the radius of a circle, because the word ray, found in betray, in Latin means radius or wheel. We'll be seeing a wheel in this part, and a number for a radius of a circle from this particular symbol group in the next part. Another unusual scribal reason for the lines over the two letters indicates that there's a missing M or N in some words, which are considered what they call marks with independent meanings. And this is according to Wikipedia as well as other similar sources. So we'll be on the lookout where an M or N will fit into these translations. The last reason for the two lines over the V's is to signify the abbreviations for the initials of the Sword Brothers' first and last name, which are the same and can either be two W's or two U's. At the time, Middle English did not differentiate between a V and a U, and even a Y for that matter, and the U and V are considered synonymous. The rest of his name is found in the symbol group underneath the two U's. Interestingly enough, the Sword Brother is quite shy when it comes to his identity, and appears to prefer to stay incognito, because this translation is a code within a code that uses mirror images to decipher his name out of an inner core. No one is going to cross the Atlantic Ocean in the medieval time and not leave his name or some sign of passing, and our Sword Brother is no exception. As mentioned in the two earlier parts, the delta symbol found in the first symbol group before the down-pointing arrow not only means change or trajectory, but is the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet and can also mean the fourth in the order of a series of items. Now moving down to the symbol group underneath, we'll be making mirror images out of a core of 4 letters while working with 5 letters and ignoring the last 2 symbols for the name translation. The first and last symbols of this group will outline 2 very common Christograms, which are abbreviated letters representing the name Jesus Christ. One clue for this comes from the translation from the previous symbol group, or the last symbol group on line 1, which indicates Deo, meaning God or godlike. Even before the 2nd century, Christian scribes frequently abbreviated divine names or titles, usually using the first or more letters of a word, while indicating this with an overline, which is called a suspension, or they used the first and last letter of a word, which is commonly found in Revelations and is called a contraction. These abbreviations in plural are called nomina sacra, or singular nominum sacrum, meaning sacred names or name. It's said that the appearance of these sacred abbreviated names with an overline is more of an act of reverence rather than a purely practical space-saving abbreviation. If you note, there's something different about this I, because now it's a definitive I instead of 2 vertical dots, as seen in the Middle English words below and betray. Therefore, this is indicating that something has changed in the way you translate this code. This is because the I is part of 2 Christograms, and the first one uses the contraction method of the first and last letter of the symbol group, which is I and X, making the Christogram IX. Note this didn't even need to be translated. Any theologian at the time would have noticed this right away. This Christogram is constructed from the first initials of the spelling of the Greek names Jesus Christ, Jesus Christos. Once again, as we saw in part 2, Constantinople comes into the picture where Pope Innocent III was involved in military force overtaking this already Christian city, and it was hypothesized in part 2 that possibly something had been taken from the city and smuggled along numerous trade routes to a Sword Brother stronghold. These letters are also the first 2 letters of the Christian ichthys fish that outlines the Greek letters iota, chi, theta, epsilon, and sigma for the words Jesus Christ, Son of God, Saviour. This has been symbolic of Christianity since its infancy circa the 2nd century AD, and probably had something to do with Jesus Christ being the fisherman of man. Surprisingly, the 3rd letter in this abbreviation, theta, is the first letter in the next symbol group. The Ichthyos Greek letters are commonly seen forming the spokes of a wheel when the letters are combined. This type of wheel is seen in many different religions, especially the Hindu and Buddhist Dharma, that I'll loosely interpret as the principles of cosmic order and service to God. And this is also seen in the seasonal Celtic wheel of the year, geared more for times of sowing and harvesting. So now that we know about this abbreviation, what does IX really mean? In reality, this mimics a solar wheel, and it appears the Celtic Druid aspect comes closest to its real meaning. In the summer, the June solstice reaches the Tropic of Cancer for the longest day of the year, and twice a year it reaches the equinox point of equal light and darkness. And in the winter, the December solstice reaches the Tropic of Cancer for the shortest day of the year. Note that the complementary angles from the equinox line on both sides are 23.5 degrees, with a total range of 47 degrees. This is demonstrating the different locations where the sun peeps over the horizon to make the seasons throughout the year. If we translate the Middle English word by low without the W and consider the reverse percent sign that signifies the navigational great circle to equal 0 or 1, this word adds up to the numbers 47 to 48 and reinforces that we're going on the right track. There's a good reason that these numbers come out to 47 to 48, and it will become quite obvious when we start working with the numbers in the next part. Now let's take a good look at where the sun peeps over the horizon at the time of the solstices and equinoxes and compare them to the IX symbol. As you can see, the X outlines the position of the solstices for the northern and southern hemispheres, and the straight line along the equator is the position of the equinoxes. And interestingly enough, the Vatican St. Peter's Square in Rome outlines the exact same motion of the sun, with the obelisk doing its sundial thing. And then there's the amazing alignment with Stonehenge's pinnacle stone at the very time of the solstice's summer sunrise. That demonstrates how important seasonal turning points were for the Bronze Age tribes. Many other things are going on at the same time. The sun is at different angles throughout the year, and also the sun isn't stationary in the sky, but roams in a circuit called an analemma. The word comes from the Latin and Greek word for the pedestal of a sundial. It only makes sense that the ancients revered the sun, the Earth's unique distance from the sun, and their connection to each other as the life-giving force of the universe. Whoever took on the personification as messenger of our Creator at any time in history was secondary until religious sects took the upper hand. This is when the medieval Inquisition started to heat up during the inception of the Brothers of the Sword Order under Pope Innocent III's tutelage, whose attempt to stomp out heresy were lukewarm at best. Instead of revering the sun and the passing of the seasons that brought the bounty for our human existence, the messenger connection to our Creator supposedly continued to make the sun shine and the earth spin on its axis. And this concept picked up momentum, which led to the Knights Templar demise. The reverence of the sun and the rites of passage of the solstices were to honor the divine plan of life and the spiritual higher consciousness of humans, which is allegorically the path to enlightenment. Sadly, it appears something got direly lost in the translation of humans seeking their higher selves. The next Christogram that we'll construct grows out of the other by using the first 2 or 3 Greek capital letters for the name Jesus or Christos. And yes, the translation for the X for the inscribed stone is H. So the next Christogram is IH, but is more commonly seen with an S for IHS, in which we can borrow the above S used for the word sword. And again, we discover that these letters outline the solstices and equinoxes that span the 47-degree range between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. Perhaps the IHS found in the center of this image of the sun is much more appropriate. Solar wheels have varying amounts of divisions that represent time and space, and can be stripped down to the bare bones of just a circle with a dot in the center, which is called a circumpunct and commonly symbolizes the sun or the solar system. To the Gnostics and Greek philosophers, it meant God, or what is called monad, referring to the divine, a supreme being, a single unit, number one, the absolute, or what I consider the superlative. Interestingly, the circumpunct symbol is found at the end of the next symbol group that we'll be translating in the next video. Additionally, the circle with the dot symbolizes the Hermetics' gold of alchemy, astrology, theosophy, and perhaps the inscribed stone's message just may be the true treasure. However, the Sword Brother does give a location for a possible treasure. Now let's visit the inscribed satellite stone that was purportedly found on Oak Island and was introduced as one of 4 main clues on part 1. We see an H, a small Greek cross surrounded by 4 dots, and a circumpunct. Both the IX and the IHS Christograms very nicely outline the solstices and equinox line of the Earth when these symbols are combined. It appears the navigational great circle that we introduced in part 1 has now turned into the celestial sphere, with the Earth in the center, and this brings to mind the saying, "as above, so below," that was stated in the emerald tablets of the Hermes Trismegistus. The longitude and latitude of the navigational great circle uses the same processes as the ascension and declination of the celestial sphere to find the location of stars instead of a location on Earth. However, our Sword Brother falls short of using these coordinates and gives the characteristics of a certain famous star system that he wants you to find. Returning to our inscribed stone translation, we'll find that the Christogram IH translates into the associated Greek numbers for the number 18, which is known to represent the name Jesus too. I was unfamiliar with this cryptic numeral association, but this number was pointed out as I researched the Christograms. He also reinforces this number a second time by putting the reverse percent sign for the number 1 in front of the number 8 for H, making the number 18 again, just in case you missed the first number 18. In fact, if you've noticed, the name Brothers of the Sword contains 18 letters. The Christogram IX is affiliated to the IH because it's a Roman numeral for number 9. The number 9 appears in the Greek numeral translation for the word Deo, meaning God, but it's also found twice in the next symbol group, which is the last symbol group that's yet to be translated. Obviously 9 plus 9 equals 18, but the graphic form of the Roman numeral for 18 has an interesting spin to it. X can represent Christ, the V a woman's womb, and the 3 iotas for a trinity. The letters left in this symbol group for the Sword Brothers name translation is IALLA. The Sword Brother refers to God with the Greek and Latin word Deo, and right after that the suffix IAL appears in the next symbol group, which means related to or connected to. Now if you've noticed, the Arabic word for God, Allah, appears, ALLA, celestial sphere, and then the H. By adding the I in front of these letters, it's referring to a connection of I ego to the relationship with God. Middle English has the suffix, or they wouldn't have had the word imperial. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, which reminds us that Logos, the Word, is Theos, God itself, and our connection to the sea of a conscious collective of a unity of one. Everything in the universe is made in pairs, opposites, mirror images, and only the universe itself has a unity. Interestingly, the word Theos is not necessarily Greek, but also has the etymology for the old German word Thud, meaning people or folk. And if you remember, the Brothers of the Sword was originally a Germanic order. We've dwelled enough on the preliminaries, so let's turn to translating the Sword Brother's name. We'll be seeking mirror images with the letters IALLA. With these facts in mind, let's look for the medieval Gaelic name Uilliam Uallas. Let's translate his last name first. The mirror image to make the surname Uallas requires you to merely strike out the I in the IALLA for ALLA and borrow the U and the S that's superimposed over the U from above to make the name Uallas. The same is done for the first name Uilliam by making the mirror image of IALLA into ILLI and keeping the second A in situ, and then borrowing the U from above, and then using the missing scribal M at the end of the name for Uilliam. Uilliam Uallas is medieval Gaelic for the English name William Wallace. Today he's more famously known as Braveheart from the Mel Gibson movie. I'm certainly open for any suggestions if you have a better translation for another name. In fact, I started my search around 1100 AD with Richard I of England, known as Lionheart, and then worked forward to 1300 AD. Now you could use two W's to make all of the first name and most of his last name sans the C and E at the end of Wallace. He was a Scotsman at heart and wanted his name to be remembered in medieval Gaelic. Why was the message mostly in Middle English? The answer is because after the Norman conquest of England, starting 1266 AD, most of the educated could speak some Latin and or French. However, the majority could speak or at least understand English. Why William Wallace? Because he was the only one who had the language skills to inscribe the stone, the education, the means, the motive, and the opportunity to make a trip to Oak Island to hide something that his brotherhood thought was valuable enough to hide. I find it an interesting twist that the Northern Livonian, Perusian, Lithuanian Crusades are now taking center stage over the Holy Land Crusades. William Wallace was not only a great war strategist and warrior, but a well-read and accomplished scholar in his own right, and known to have spoken 7 to 8 languages: German, English, Latin, Greek, Gaelic, French, Italian, and some say Spanish. And you could possibly even add Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian. His command of various languages made him an excellent military leader for his ability to speak with men from different cultures and countries. Wallace evidently studied to become a monk, and he was said to be educated by his uncles, who were supposedly Augustinian priests, which makes sense because at the time the Hierophants were the most highly educated and had knowledge of navigation and the celestial sky. Here's a quote Wallace made about his uncle in Latin. "When I was a boy, the priest, my uncle, carefully inculcated upon me the Latin proverb, and then I learned, and have ever since kept in my mind, liberty is the best thing, my son. Never live under a Slavish bond." In part 2, we discover the Livonian Brothers of the Sword was established by Bishop Albert of Riga circa 1202, and Pope Innocent III sanctioned the establishment in 1204 for a second time. In 1236, the Sword Brothers supposedly merged with the Knights Teutonic after a disastrous battle that crippled the order. However, the order appeared to have maintained autonomy from the Teutonics and continued to wear the red cross of the Templars instead of the black cross of the Teutonics. Now we fast forward to the year 1286, when the sudden death of Scotland's King Alexander III broke the stability of peace and left the throne heirless, thus escalating rival family disputes that was heading towards civil war. Then in steps in King Edward of England, who was unwisely called upon to mediate the bickering of the elite families. By 1296, Edward stormed the borders of Scotland, deposed the controversial appointed king, and forced homage from the Scottish nobility. William Wallace suddenly appears in the history books in May of 1297, when he was involved in the killing of an English high sheriff. Many embellished stories surround why he became a freedom fighter, to include killing by the English of his father, wife, siblings, and even a brother-in-law. In reality, very little is known about his life before 1297. Circa June 1297, it said he participated in the raiding of the city of Scone, which is connected nicely to the 50-degree bearing that we found from the inscribed stone that leads us to Scone Chapel, and as well the 55-degree bearing that leads us to St. Patrick's Church, Hill of Tara, Ireland. Both sites hosted the Stone of Destiny at different times that was used for royal coronations. In September of 1297, Wallace wielded his famous sword and was victorious at the Battle of Stirling Bridge during the First Scottish War of Independence, which catapulted Wallace into the public eye, giving him the titles of Guardian, Knight, and Hero of Scotland. However, his political high tide waned, and in April 1298, Wallace was defeated in the Battle of Falkirk, and on July 22, 1298, he resigned his guardianship. Although a two-handed sword is on display, similar to the one that Wallace could have carried, it's not believed to be his sword, and that his original sword has never been found. On October 11, 1297, after his victory at Stirling Bridge, Wallace wrote a letter in Latin, now called the Lubeck Letter, announcing that the ports of Scotland are now open for business and no longer under English rule. As we found in Part 2, Bishop Albert of Riga, the eventual Livonian capital, had organized local German and nearby island of Gotland merchants and began trade with the German port of Lübeck along the Baltic Sea. How interesting now to find a letter connected to Wallace and the German city of Lübeck. This letter displays the only known cast of Wallace's seal, bearing a Scottish lion rampant on the front and an archer's insignia of a strong bow and an arrow on the back. Although it has been assumed that his father's name was Malcolm, the closing signature states William, son of Allen. Therefore, the mirror image of the code can quickly be changed from ALLA to ALA, and then adding the missing N from the scribal abbreviation for the name Allen. Let's go back and review the translated word below from the stone from another perspective. If we add the missing W, you end up with the spelling by lo. And the word lo in German means lion, and by lo means two lions. Could this be indicating Wallace and his father Allen, and the lion rampant, for their seal? In the latter part of 1299, Wallace sailed to La Rochelle, France, on the premise of garnering support for Scottish independence from King Philip IV, who was in Paris at the time, which loosely places Wallace in France circa November of 1299. Wallace did not reappear in the history books until the Battle of Roslin on February 24, 1303, when the Battle of Roslin sparked from Sir Henry St. Clair's announcement to the marriage of Lady Margaret Ramsay. So the big question is, where was William Wallace between the years 1300 to 1302 AD? Now here's something very strange. While Wallace visited court, King Philip IV penned a letter to Pope Boniface VIII requesting Wallace's favor from the Pope, vaguely stating that this is in regards to those things which concern him that he has to expedite, and then later signed in November of 1300. However, there is no proof that Wallace ever took possession of the letter or had visited the Pope in Rome. This is a rather surprising communique, because King Philip's relationship with the Pope was less than cordial because of secular taxation of the clergy. To finish the story about Henry Sinclair, which at the time appears his name was St. Clair, Wallace had attended Henry's knighthood ceremony in 1297 and then reappears in public with St. Clair for the Battle of Roslin. Later, the Sinclair family was commonly known to have strong ties to the Knights Templar. There's always some truth to stories, and one story contended that Sinclair left La Rochelle to covertly visit a land in the west. Let's see if we can find any truth that someone left from La Rochelle area with the possible intention of visiting far-off lands across the Atlantic. Now here's another few strange occurrences that happened in 1299. On Wallace's voyage to La Rochelle, a number of legends swirl about that he encountered ships, up to 16 in some recounts, and supposedly had a swashbuckling sword cross with a pirate named Thomas de Longueville, known as Red Rover. Little is known about Longville other than that he was wrongly accused of murder, which no one seems to know whom he killed, and therefore he became a pirate. Oddly enough, Wallace and Longville evidently became fast friends before they disembarked at La Rochelle, France, purportedly flying the pirates' flags as they entered the harbor. And as impossible as this may seem, it's said that King Philip IV pardoned and even knighted Longville. If Longville truly had a fleet of ships, then the mystery of how Wallace traveled to Oak Island and the many different stories that Oak Island treasure is connected to pirates is solved. After the visit to King Philip, Wallace then promptly disappeared for 2 years and then reappeared into the public eye in February of 1303. Wallace was captured in August of 1305, tried for treason, found guilty, dragged naked through the streets of London by horse, partially hung, and while still alive was emasculated, eviscerated, beheaded, and quartered. His head was dipped in tar and displayed on the London Bridge, and his limbs were displayed in the cities of Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. They really hated this guy. It's rather bizarre that the connection to Scotland is so prevalent to Oak Island, because the flag of Nova Scotia sure tells the story that they are the new Scotland. Well, I certainly introduced some food for thought. While the masses looked to the Holy Land Crusades for answers, it appears the big action was taking place in the backdrop of the Northern Crusades, with a possible clandestine group that gives the impression of being connected to the Knights Templar. Uilliam Uallas was the best fit for a multitude of parameters, and I believe there are truths in my findings, and that many of the coding methods were common knowledge among the echelon of the Brotherhood, and would have been recognized right away to retrieve a possible treasure. In Part 4, we'll finish the translation of the inscribed stone to find a star system that's characterized by the last symbol group that is yet to be translated. So stay tuned. We're getting closer to understanding why I found a possible treasure location.